Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Welcome back, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, politics, culture and idea, hosted by myself, Nick Dyrenforth, head honcho of the JCRC. And I'm joined once again by my mate, Kung Fu Cos Samaras, Director of Redbridge, JCR board member. Yaso Tekanis, how are you, mate?
Pretty good.
Great. We're joined today by a very interesting guest from the other side of the aisle, because we are ecumenical. We are Catholic in the non-religious sense of that word, and we like to talk to interesting people. We have with us today Keith Wolahan.
Thank you for having me. I'm here for my confession.
Well, I'll hold you to that, Keith. By way of introduction, Keith, we're going to dig deep into his backstory. He was born in Dublin in 1977. Another Gen X/Gen Y, and migrated with his family to Oz in 1988. He was educated at Ringwood Secondary College before he earned dual degrees in arts and commerce at Melbourne Uni. I like that angle because so did I. But I didn't acquire an honours law degree from Monash, where he also won the Sir Charles Low Moot Prize. He built a successful career in corporate law, joined the Victorian Bar in 2010, specialising in commercial and public law, and along the way somehow found time to complete a Masters in International Relations at Cambridge. Wow. Keith also served his country, like a guest that we hosted a few months ago, Andrew Hastie, Cosy, with distinction for nearly 2 decades in the Army Reserve, rising to captain in the elite 1st Commando Regiment, with deployments to East Timor and Afghanistan. In 2022, he entered federal parliament as the Liberal member for Menzies and did important work on committees across economics, anti-corruption and the voice referendum. Unfortunately for Keith, after 2024, there was a redistribution which turned Menzies into a notional Labor seat, and he was unsuccessful in retaining his seat at the recent May election, and he returned to the bar. He's married to Sarah. They have 2 delightful young children. I love their names, Leo and Eva. It's the name of my uncle and my grandmother. I love the names. I love the names. So formally, welcome to Curtin's Cast, Keith.
No, thank you for having me. Long-time listener, so enjoy your podcast.
Long-time listener, more than first-time caller, first-time guest. Tell us about you've got a very Irish name. You're born in Dublin. Tell us about growing up in Dublin. Why did the family decide to make the move to Australia?
It was all of my dad. He was an adventurous soul who had a gap year where most of it was spent in Australia. And I remember as a kid, he'd tell stories, and almost all of them came back to his travels here, and it was the very essence of a land of opportunity. And he was always of the view that in Ireland, certainly at the time, and maybe it's true of England, your success in life was more determined by your surname or your accent or who you knew. And he felt like that wasn't the case in Australia. So it was the classic aspirational story of opportunity. That's what drove him to come here. We were initially rejected. We didn't have enough points. My parents hadn't finished high school, they didn't go to university, so there's a points criteria, and we thought it was all over after a few years of applying. But someone in the process sent us a letter and said, if you leave within the next month, you can go. And Dad said, pack your bags, we're going.
Opportunity. So on the Labor side, we'd say your family's held by class. Would they have described themselves as working class Dubliners?
Yes.
Yep.
And even when
what did your mum and dad get up to? You said they didn't.
Yeah. A variety of jobs. Dad started, he worked as a baggage handler for an airline, Aer Lingus, which is the national carrier in Ireland, and a variety of jobs from driving a bus for a school to ultimately, when he came here, he qualified as a roof plumber, so he became a tradie in the end. And my mum did a variety of jobs from manufacturing to receptionist work to working at a golf club.
So why aren't you in the Labor Party? You've got the classic Labor pedigree.
Well, that's what my teachers at Ringwood Secondary College said.
Yeah, what did they do wrong? Well, what did you do wrong?
Yeah, well, it's what you did wrong. So it was, I felt that as time went by through high school, and I remember my first ever time I called into a radio station was to talk to John Brumby, because he had come to our school and we were having a disagreement, and our teacher was quite shocked that the class seemed to be leaning more Liberal than Labor, because the teacher was in the union, and was really shocked and apologised to John Brumby. So I was outraged at that apology, so I felt the need to call in on radio. But really it was university when I think I started drifting, and part of it was some of the people that I met in the university club at Melbourne Uni.
Obviously, university, you're involved. There's ideas swirling around. So you're studying economics, you're studying law. Some people Labor side just fall into the ALP. They're given a free beer by the ALP club. Was it a bit like that?
That's the pathway for most people in politics who go to university and end up finding themselves following one team or the other, depending on who they actually socialised with, right? But I suspect, Keith, your decision was a bit more deeper than that.
It was. I had a real strong belief in the values of the Liberal Party and its appeal to aspiration, that I felt like for families like mine that wanted a better future, not just for themselves but for their children and those that came next, I thought the Liberal Party, certainly at that time, spoke to those values better than the Labor Party did. And I understand that's contested, but it felt like that was the better pathway for a better future for me and the country, was through the Liberal Party.
Do you think that from your perspective, Labor, when you were forming these views, was too fixated on keeping the class system in place rather than actually embracing aspiration as a natural way of actually empowering their constituency?
I think that was part of it. The other part of it was Labor was drifting from the concept of class. And I saw often at university where you'd see people claim to be victims for a wide, long laundry list of reasons, who had way more privilege than you would ever imagine anywhere else on earth. And I just felt when Labor drifted from its conversation on class and as a subset of that on aspiration, it was losing the appeal for families like mine.
We're about the same age, so we've diverged. Paul Keating is one of the reasons I joined the Labor Party. Again, it's probably similar background to you. Poor working class parents. I kind of saw it as in my DNA, my genes. Paul Keating inspired me. But I guess as you're coming to political maturity, you've got Jeff Kennett, who is ascendant in Victoria, and John Howard after 1996.
Peter Costello.
But those figures influential in moulding your political identity?
They were, because the values of the Liberal Party were expressed by them more than any others. And again, I thought, particularly when I watched the 1996 election, that the Liberal Party then was speaking to families who wanted a better life. And it wasn't the cliched view of the Liberal Party that I was told in high school or when we migrated here, that the Liberal Party was for the rich or those who are the insiders. It was for people who are outside and wanted to get somewhere.
So how was campus life, being a campus Liberal?
Campus life, very lonely. And you got used to abuse. Although when you speak to university students, being right of centre on campus now is much harder. But back then we thought it was tough. But when you'd miss a class, the tutor or the people who'd fight with you would say, we missed you at that last one. And you realise whatever people's views are, I think people enjoy a good, respectful debate.
Yeah, I was actually reading the Sydney Morning Herald today that did a profile of campus life at Sydney University, and the Sydney Liberal Club is now effectively defunct.
Oh, really?
It's a conservative club. So I actually think that's really bad, Cos. I'm not sure what you think. I think that's bad for campus life. And certainly when I was an academic, My students didn't know they wouldn't have known my politics, and I encouraged, and I loved having students like you, Keith. I loved it.
Well, the Melbourne University Liberal Club has actually got its 100th anniversary coming up. It predates the Liberal Party. So liberalism as a set of beliefs and values is older than the capital L Liberal Party, and it's a shame if that's disappeared from campus in Sydney.
The point you made around when you were coming of age politically, so to speak, that the Liberal Party to you represented the sort of family ethos that attracted you to that form of politics. Nick, if you and I go back and have a think about, Jeff Kennett, Howard, they really did develop and Peter Costello, a really strong brand that's who they stood for.
Yep.
It was that particular lower middle class, maybe middle class constituency. They weren't caught going into bat for the top end of town at the cost and at the expense of this particular group of Australians. Keith, I would argue now, I think over the last, I would say, probably that last, I wouldn't say 10 years, but close to it, I think the Liberal brand's drifted away from that in a very big way and found itself pigeonholed as the political party that represents the top end of town, doesn't represent what is today 2025 version of families out there. I
think there was a shift, particularly from post-global financial crisis in 2008, when you saw interest rates collapse. Those who had equity, whether in a home, property or shares, saw massive increases ever since. And if you were shut out of owning equity and you were living paycheck to paycheck, that gap between those who have and those don't has accelerated. And the idea that you can just work a bit harder, take a bit more of a risk and bridge that gap, it's getting harder and harder for people. And there is a fair criticism that the Liberal Party hasn't met those expectations to be solving that problem for people now, particularly those who are millennials and Gen Y. So I think if you look to the future of the Liberal Party, it has to recognise that Australia has changed. It changed particularly since 2008, and not just in this country. And our future must provide a pathway for people to think that we're there to solve their problems, and they're massive.
I'm going to deep dive into the Liberal Party's struggles at the moment. That's putting it mildly, I think. I think you'd probably agree with me. Some people describe it as existential crisis. Just coming back, you come from Irish Catholic roots. There was a very distinctive Irish Catholic identity in Australia for a century or more, and most of those people gravitated to the Labor Party from the sort of 60s onwards. They started a slow march towards people like you and your family, slow march towards the Liberal Party. So you had people like Tony Abbott, who once would have been had a home in the Labor Party, joining City University Liberal Club and then becoming leader. I was interested about that. Also, faith. We've spoken about faith with a number of our guests. I was really struck by something you said. You said, my dog tags say Catholic, but for me, my faith and my politics are separate. And people have sort of pointed to the, very clear and sharp distinction between the way that your predecessor, Kevin Andrews, expressed his faith and its role in his political identity. So what does it mean to be someone from an Irish Catholic background in Australia today, and what does faith mean to you, Keith Wolahan? Big questions, big existential questions.
I think being from an Irish Catholic background was fundamentally tribal. That was who your tribe was. I think that's drifted to the point that until others prompted me, I didn't consider myself as a migrant. I always thought that was someone who looked different to me and didn't speak English from birth. And someone said to me, no, you are. And even though it's easier when you speak English from birth and you don't look like you're a migrant, people want you to say that. Because when you go to the citizenship ceremonies or you go to a school, people want to know that you relate to them. And so the seat that I represented, 70% of people were first or second generation migrants. It's huge. Whereas the national average is 50%. And so 70%. And I embrace that not because it's a point of distinction that makes you better. It's just to point out that this is the land of opportunity, and the Australian dream, which is under threat at the moment, is an idea that I think mirrors the American dream, but puts it into practice better than the American dream does. I think in the United States, the polarization, not just of politics, but of wealth, has meant that I think Australia gets that balance better. And so families who are coming, through Melbourne Airport now on the same journey that my family took, I still think this is a better place to be, but we can't take that for granted. In terms of faith, I'm not the best Catholic at all, and I don't think any Catholic is. But it is private, and I don't bring that to bear in my views on politics, but it's still important to me and my family.
Sure. It's interesting, isn't it, Cozzy? Like, I don't know whether it's a very Melbourne thing, very Victorian thing, or Australian thing, because Keith's just touched on something. People still come up to me, and you look more ethnic than me, and people come up to me and they say, "Where are you from?" And I say, "Melbourne."
Yeah,
I'm Australian. But people, many people think I'm Greek. I'm not.
No, you're not.
I've got the DNA test to prove it.
Yeah, correct. I'm actually writing a book on this subject matter, right?
Yes, congratulations on that contract, mate.
Yeah, in terms of how this country has been formed by two significant waves of migration, and that is post-Second World War and obviously the second and bigger one of the last 25 odd years. And intermixed in all of that is, yes, European, yes, all those sort of ethnicities that people would naturally jump to straight away when you talk about migration. But I'm also writing about migration from the UK because it is massive and significant from all the way from Second War onwards, right into the last decade. So, and we quickly forget that. Right? So I think it's very important, even for social cohesion purposes, that we broaden that conversation about who we are as a migrant nation, that we are not just from certain parts of the world, we're from everywhere, and evolving very fast.
We certainly are, Cos, and this is an evolving conversation. Before we sort of move on to the Liberal Party and what it's up against in 2025, just coming back to some of your formative experiences. You served in the Army Reserve, Commando. How did your experience in combat zones and the personal loss of two friends, Marcus Case and Greg Scher? Greg Scher was a Jewish Australian. I know, each year he is remembered in the Jewish news and by the community during the Afghan deployment. Why did you sign up, and how did that experience shape your views on, what does it mean to be Australian? Leadership, and I guess your sort of an ethical, moral sense of the world?
I signed up for two reasons. One was a sense of service and a way to give back to a country that had been good to us, and I thought that was the best way you could do it. The other was a sense of curiosity. The idea of serving, I always wanted to know what that was like. That's what drove me to then try out for commando selection. That's what drove me to be an officer in commandos. That's what drove me to want to be a platoon commander in combat. A sense of curiosity mixed with service. And curiosity is probably more, it's got a selfish motive to it. But service, I thought, was a way to give back. When I reflect on my experiences, and there was 3 tours of Afghanistan, they were all different, and one of Timor, I got so much more than I lost, even though you could potentially lose everything. And it gave me a perspective on the capacity for younger people to do amazing things for this country. Most of the people who were in my platoon were kids when September 11 happened. And there they were in a foreign country with an Australian flag on their shoulder, willing to risk their lives for our country. I left that experience, a bit jaded for how it ended as a conflict, with more of a realist perspective on international relations, but also hope and optimism that no generation is fundamentally better than the one that comes next. Every Australian generation has the capacity to be brave and great and to make us a brave and great country. And that's why I'm fundamentally an optimist about politics, and I'm sure we'll get to whether I'm an optimist about the Liberal Party.
I think the Army needs to recruit you as an influencer, because the numbers for recruitment are dropping through the floor with the younger generation now.
It is, and I speak to many veterans who have children, and you say, well, would you encourage your children to join? And I think any good parent would want their child to make that decision themselves. But it's short almost 5,000 people. It's dropped a little bit.
Yeah.
That's not about pay. There's something not quite right, and I think it's linked to the political economic contract with young Australians.
100%.
If you feel like you were being let down by a country economically and for your future, why would you risk your life to fight for it?
So what did your family think about you joining? Mad? Were they proud of you?
I think they were proud,
Anxious, worried?
but always anxious and worried. Because when you're over there, time speeds up, but when you're here, time slows down.
The point you make around the social contract is absolutely critical. If you think back to the 1930s, you had a group of teenagers in the US who were living through a depression. And Roosevelt, with that New Deal, we've mentioned this before, Nick, in another podcast, came in and gave them confidence that the state was going to lean in and provide them with a future and a contract that both government and society were going to bond together and make this thing work. Hence, they went on and did some amazing things as a generation for their country within a decade. I think that's what's missing here right now, and that is this belief amongst young people that the governments of the day are serious in putting up a proper solution that talks to them and their anxieties.
Spot on.
I really like the fact that you have that diverse life experience, and you, correct me if I'm doing the figures here, you went to Parliament when you're 43, 44?
Early 40s, yeah.
Early 40s. But I think that's a really good age.
Yeah.
There are some politicians, I just mentioned Paul Keating before, he was in Parliament 25. My view is that's too young. Some people can do it, but I think you need life experience. Why did you obviously had a successful career at the bar, in academia, great training within the academy. Why did you give up that comfortable experience, seek preselection? It wasn't the easiest preselection to win. It was a contested preselection against Kevin Andrews. Why did you give that up to enter Parliament and run under the Liberal banner?
For the same reasons that I put on a uniform and went overseas 4 times, a combination of service and curiosity. The difference between politics and, say, serving overseas, I think the consequences of your decisions are at scale. So as much as we did our best to serve the country overseas, it wasn't at scale. And politics is a way to do it at scale. You can also do harm at scale.
Yes.
And so I think there is a purpose for politics in putting good people in to make it a better country. There's also a purpose in politics in keeping bad people from doing harm. I think that matters too. And I thought I had something to offer. I was also curious about it. I've always loved politics. My granddad, again, going back to Ireland, he would always pull out the newspaper and we would read it together and talk about the world. And I remember he did that when Ronald Reagan came to visit Ireland once, and I was fascinated that I looked up and we saw his helicopter, Marine Force One, flying over our home in Dublin, and just, seeing that physical thing in the air and the story that you were reading in the newspaper with your granddad, I thought that was amazing. So it's a fascinating place to be, politics, even when you're on the periphery like this or when you're right in it, like I was in the last Parliament.
It'd be a tough gig, hard job. But
it is, but on balance, it's an amazing opportunity.
Politics can be fun. Like we had Lord Glasman, I'm not sure whether you're aware of Lord Glasman, Blue Labour fame from the UK, one of our first few episodes, said one of the problems with people on the left is they've forgotten that politics is enjoyable, it's fun. It's about socialising. It's about being part of a collective. It's about doing things, not being so miserable.
Well, to quote Hamilton, you're in the room where it happens. It's an amazing opportunity to serve your country in that way.
You talked about the dog collar in terms of being Catholic. Where would you see yourself in? Often the Liberal Party, Labor Party is described in these terms as well. Liberals described as a broad church, big tents. Where do you see yourself within the Liberal Party tent? I see you described as a moderate, classical Liberal, are you conservative? Andrew Hastie didn't shy away from describing himself as a red Tory, which is a very British expression of a form of Liberal conservatism, stressing the conservatism, or do you not like labels whatsoever?
I think there's a role for labels. I'm not a card-carrying conservative. I describe myself as a classical liberal, but you can twist yourself in knots about what that means. I think those labels are becoming quite redundant. They're really tribal labels for factions. That's what it is. And it's human nature to form factions. If you took 50 people and put them on an island, they would gravitate to two groups. There'd probably be some third loony group that decides who wins every now and then, but that's what humans do. So in that place, people will gravitate to two groups. I think the more important division really is the perspective of Australia that you represent, whether it's a metro perspective or a rural and regional perspective. That doesn't always neatly align with your views on social issues or economics, but it largely does. And so what I found when I was there is that people who were from a metro urban area often reflected the interests of their electorate more than those who were from a rural regional area.
So you get into Parliament 2022. What were your impressions? What surprised you, I guess negatively and positively, about the experience?
Most of it was as I expected and positive. The one negative that stood out was it's an isolating place. It's an isolating building. You would often find yourself, say, preparing for the next day in your office, and you'd really have to make an effort to try and find someone else, like look out the corridor, and sometimes you'd smell Jason Wood cooking a curry up the corridor. It got so we had to get scented candles in the end to keep that smell out. But I love Jason, if he's listening. I really do. And his food tasted amazing, so you just don't want to smell it. But it's a really lonely place, and people come from all over the country. They gather in this environment. Wherever you sleep, you leave there in the dark, you get back in the dark, and often the most socialising you'll do will be in the parliamentary gym, walking past people, going to divisions and going to party or parliamentary committee meetings. So you could easily get lost in yourself if you didn't make an effort. And so I tried to make an effort to maintain that human contact.
It's positive that some of you actually replaced the pub with the gym.
Yeah, that's right.
But I like it's embracing honesty here. It's the first time I've meant to ask leaders, is there a sense of loneliness in politics? Again, Keating comes up again. It said, if you want a friend in politics, get a dog. It's interesting that you used that word. And I've asked a few guests, did you form, in your short period there, did you form friendships with people on the other side of politics, or did you stay with your tribe?
No, both. I certainly did, and there's some that I stay in touch with now. And I liked that. I liked that you can do that because, the wheel will turn. I'm an optimist about our democracy, that there will be a day when there will be a majority Liberal government. I believe in that. It won't happen by accident. It'll happen because we're determined to make it happen in the national interest. But when that happens, I hope we use it, and we use it for the national interest and not our own interest. Equally, in this position, my ultimate mission is the success of Australia and its people. And so whilst I would like to see the Labor Party fail, I don't want the nation to fail. I want the nation to succeed. And that will always come first. And so you find good friends. It's not friendship in the way that you would find in, say, combat, where I was from a unit that had this amazing culture where people would say very brutal, honest truths to your face, and they'd say really nice things behind your back. And I always thought, whatever that culture is, I want to find places like that. Politics isn't like that. No. And that's okay. That's okay. You recognise the culture of the place that you're in.
But, that's the Henry Lawson definition of mateship. It comes from one of his poems. It says, a mate is someone who abuses you to your face and defends you behind your back. Yeah. It's a great line.
Oh, and I found a place like that, and it was wonderful, and they're very rare.
Dealing with defeat. So we have to go here. He'd been in Parliament for 3 years. So whether you expect it or not, you lost to a Labor candidate with a Singaporean Chinese background.
That's right.
As I believe. And I want to touch on, there was a large Chinese Australian diaspora in the seat of Menzies. Defeat, after one term, how did it feel? And how have you dealt with that emotionally and, within your family unit? Because I imagine it must, you've left a successful career, you've jumped into Parliament, and then unfortunately lost your seat. And it must feel like being on a roller coaster.
It is.
And for kids as well.
Yeah. I never saw myself having this guaranteed 10, 20-year career. I think those days are over for everyone.
Yes.
And I would caution people who are sitting on double-digit margins now, it can change very quickly.
100%.
I didn't think that in 2022 because of the wipeout in urban areas. And then when I saw the Aston by-election, when it got worse, that's when I thought we are in serious trouble as a party in urban metro areas. And so I was always worried. I remember being on the ABC panel that night, and I think that was when we were sent the message about what was going to happen in 2025. And we didn't really listen. And so I knew in my bones we had an uphill battle, particularly in a seat like mine. And then when the redistribution happened, it got even harder. And none of that's to complain about that. I think our independent boundary commission is essential to our democracy. But when 26% of your seat is new, you then have to pick yourself up and try and get known in an area that doesn't know you, and you're running out of time. And so I think the boundary change made me think it was really hard. But then when I think back to our flawed polling, I'm going to tell you what I was told we were at 59-41 in Menzies before Christmas. Now, I never believed that.
No.
Because I thought, how can everyone else be wrong and we're right? And that's just blind optimism. Something's wrong. And so as we went through to the campaign and the polling, we were constantly outliers. I thought, please assume the worst, don't assume the best. So I assumed the worst, but I still took comfort from, you watch where advertising goes. I felt like Menzies only really became competitive for the Labor Party in the last few weeks. And there's three things that sort of had a domino effect from HEX, work from home, and the commentary around spies for Chinese diaspora. So those three things were a wicked combination politically that came together to help us not just lose seats like Menzies, but a bunch of others. And the sad part about that is a lot of that's self-inflicted. To your point about how you pick yourself up, you have to pick yourself up, and you can't feel sorry for yourself. All of us, your listeners and others, would know people who have gone through the most unimaginable tragedies. So for me or anyone else to feel sorry for ourselves in this position, when that is the deal, you don't sign up to politics knowing that you're guaranteed this for going forward. You're not. So I've been determined not to feel sorry for myself. The bit that probably hurt was my children were very active in the campaign, and that was their choice, my daughter in particular. And I remember the only time it hit hard was when I looked at my last Instagram photo of the day before, and she's 10, Eva. She was upright and happy. And then there's a picture I put on the night where she's slouched, and I thought, oh, what have I done? I've dragged my family through this because I'm a volunteer. They're conscripts. And then that day I went and talked to her. I said, are you okay, Eva? And she goes, yeah. And I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? She goes, I'm going to be Prime Minister. I thought, she's all right. She's going to be fine. So I think once I saw how resilient children are and that I think this will make her a stronger person. And I think she started her own revenge story already. So watch out, everyone.
I mean, your seat you occupy, if you were to look for a seat, let's say, okay, it's in Melbourne, that best typifies what Australia's become. It's the people that live in Menzies, right? It's that diversity aspect of it. It's the Chinese diaspora. It's the professional class that's been moving out there in very significant numbers over the last, I'll say, 10, 15 years, and completely transforming suburbs. It is modern Australia. And that's why I think that losing a seat like Menzies is probably more profound for the coalition in the Liberal Party than I think some people in your side of politics appreciate. Because it is that neighbouring seat of Deakin, Aston, these seats historically were obviously, very, very safe political territory for the Liberal Party because these seats occupied what was then, once upon a time, middle Australia, middle-class Australia. And middle-class Australia's changed. Nick and I come from the Labor side. We know how hard you worked to defend that seat. If there was someone that was going to defend it, it would have been you. And I think that, as you rightly pointed out, external circumstances completely just drove over all your hard work.
Yeah, and I don't, and I'm not someone who doesn't accept responsibility. So I was the member. I lost.
You've taken full responsibility.
I'm responsible. So, but I saw that those factors hurt. Let me give you an example on the Chinese spies one. I worked particularly hard in that community because I think, as a party, the diaspora community should be our way back and should be for us, because they're families like mine who came here for a better life. They're more likely to be small business owners. They're more likely to be quite conservative on back to basics education, on reduced crime. Their core equities are our core equities. But we have managed to not only fight for them, but find new ways to offend them. And that hurt. And when I explained that particular comment, which could have been made by anyone, I don't hold any ill will against the person who said it. It could have been made by anyone. I say, imagine if that, instead of was spies for that community, was the mafia for Italians, or it was the IRA for Irish. You would feel hurt. And so our Chinese staff and Chinese volunteers in the party, they were hurt. And I get it. I really do, because when you're hurt personally as to who you are, all the rest doesn't matter. And so when you look at all of the seats we've lost in 2 elections. In 2019, of the top 20 seats by Chinese diaspora, the Liberal Party used to have 12 out of 20. Then it went to 7 in 2022. Now it's gone to 2. So in 2 elections, we lost 10 on one diaspora.
Yes,
then there's
that's
the
right.
Indian diaspora and the other diaspora. So my plea to my colleagues who are there, the only way back to get those 24 seats you need to win to for government is through the multicultural community. That's where I think the political low-hanging fruit is for people to be relevant to modern Australia.
So we interviewed Chinese and Indian Australians way before the federal election. It was for another piece of work, but we got into the weeds with them around their values, exactly as you articulated. They're aspirational, they're small business. A very common answer from the Indian Australian community when we asked them, so what do you think of the cost of living crisis right now? Who do you blame? Their response, no one in particular, I just work harder. So what are your aspirations? So I want to run a business. I want to buy some cars, buy some, I want to invest in homes. And they've got this really strong conservative bent about them. And so we spent an hour talking to them about that, and they're an hour full of what I would define liberal values. And we said, so why aren't you voting for them? Oh, they just don't like us. It's sectarian. And that's where the Liberal brain's found itself in 2025, which is you've got these massive diasporas that are absolutely transforming, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, that should be conservative. But they're voting for the other side because, like Catholics in the 1950s and 60s did, because Catholics in the 1950s and 60s in Australia had a strong view that the Liberal Party didn't like them. We're in the same paradigm.
I think that's well put, and I agree with it. But it's all silly. I had a former staff member look at the recent Canadian election, and the Canadian Conservatives actually did well with the Chinese diaspora, particularly in Vancouver and British Columbia.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be this way.
No.
It just requires discipline. But fundamentally, if I'm to be critical of our party in this loss, and we should be, is that we collectively don't understand the key issues for the key people in the key seats. And that is an exercise in data, intelligence, and demography. And so I listened with interest when Paul Erickson gave his press club speech. And for those who are on my side of politics, if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. You should always listen when the victors brag. And then go, if you're short of time, go to the 24 and a half minute mark and listen to who he thanks. The first group of people he thanks are the data team. A good example of that was the HEX policy.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, out of the top 20 seats with a high HEX debt, the Liberal Party now only have 1. Now, my understanding is that was developed very cleverly as a way to bring over young people to push back in, green Labor contests, but it had this massive effect in seats like mine, in Peter Dutton's seat, and in some of the Teal seats. Because when you think about, the struggles in life, people who feel like that contract is broken, they're more often than not someone who's from a multicultural background, has a high HEX debt, and is working a graduate job that doesn't pay very much, may not exist in 10 years, and feel like we're not the people who fight for them. Whereas more often than not, when the Liberal Party thinks of the aspirational voter, they still think of who that person was in 1996, which was probably a tradie in the outer suburbs from an Anglo background.
Yes.
That person probably is earning 150 to 200 on a big construction project, got free tape, and so they feel like they're doing okay. And I know many aren't. But if you to generalise, when people from a metro area are called inner city elite all the time, they don't feel very elite, and they feel like you're not fighting for them and you don't get them. Yeah,
that's right. And the thing about the point you touched about Paul Ericsson's mention, the first thing he mentions is their data team. Paul's the younger one of a generation of Labor campaigners which I belong to. And I'm going to be biased here. Many of us came out of Victoria. And it still is to this day the Bible that runs everything within the Labor camp. You do not do anything in a very significant way unless there is a demographic reason for it. And I think where the Liberal Party can learn very quickly is start embracing the science and stop listening to minority fringe groups who have got an axe to grind that runs it right up against the masses. And it's happening to this day. We have to look at what they've been talking about the last week, and it's pretty much the same.
But at its core, that's what professional institutions should be doing, whether it's in the military or in business. My third tour of Afghanistan, I was embedded with a top-tier US Special Operations Task Group. Had about 2,000 people in Bagram with an area that covered more than just Afghanistan. And out of that 2,000, almost three-quarters were data and intelligence people. So intelligence should drive operations, and it shouldn't just drive it. When you think you've got a good idea, you should then war game it and test it to see whether it survives. And that requires humility. It requires a view on things beyond the mirror or your tummy rub judgment. And I think that's fundamentally missing from our organisation, but it's easily fixed.
So fixes. We're talking a lot about data and messaging, but what, to your mind, if you've got a magic wand and you could fix things, what's most important? Or is it a combination of both? Does the Liberal Party need to do serious internal reform? Or is it more about policy? How are you going to win back these urban voters, especially professionals, women and young people, and diaspora such as the Indian and Chinese Australian communities? Also, our mutual friend James, I have to give James a shout out. G'day, mate. He's one of our loyal listeners from the other side of the aisle. He also reminded me that you've got a very large Persian community, Iranian Australian community, which I was really... I did know that there is a large population that way, but James reminded me. How do you win back? Messaging, internal policy reform, policy.
It sounds boring, but you've got to start with a better understanding of Australia in 2025 and what it's going to look like in 2028.
Absolutely.
And that understanding isn't there. Because if you rush to policies, it's like, again, to use a military analogy, it'd be like charging up to take a hill, when if you step back and did a bit more homework, you'd realise you never had to take that hill. It was another hill that mattered.
Yep.
And so you should never rush with enthusiasm to something without knowing what you're dealing with. Because when you do that, you'll see where the opportunities are. And again, it won't be a surprise what comes out of that the opportunities, the political opportunities, are multicultural Australia, young people who've given up on owning a home, and young people who are worried about their future. And out of the 24 seats, I think about 18 of those that we would need to win are in a metro urban area.
That's right.
And when you look at the party room is full of, to their credit, most people who are from a rural and regional area, bar a few exceptions. And so what's required is people who will put perspective over perception. And that means having an out-of-body experience driven by data that says, I need to pretend I'm Keith Wolahan in Menzies because I'm not there. I need to pretend I'm in a teal seat. And you can do that and still represent the people that you do. I don't think they're in conflict. When you get that right and there's a collective understanding of who the key people are and the key seats and what drives them, then we get to prosecute solutions that matter to them, are relevant to them, and we do it by telling stories that matter to them. If we do that, then we'll be seen as a movement that is comprised of people of competence and character who put them first rather than ourselves first. And then the future is limitless. And that includes here in Victoria in the state election next year.
We could go on for hours here, Keith, because I'm loving this, but you've got a day job to go back to. So final question. If you had a message for Australians, whether living in Menzies or not, particularly young Australians, these professionals, women who are put off brand Liberal at a federal and Victorian state level at the moment, what is your message to them?
Well, anyone listening to this podcast is probably someone who already cares about politics. My message for them is for their friends who are not interested in politics, be interested, because if you're not interested in politics, politics will be interested in you. And there are 103,000 names on our war memorial of people who died for our country. And I fundamentally believe that if you give up on the Liberal Party, you are giving up on our democracy. Now, some will say, oh, well, something else will replace it. Well, that has a transaction cost and the country pays for it. I fundamentally believe in the Liberal Party, in its values, in its history and in its future. But in order to be relevant to Australia in 2025, it has to do its homework. It has to stop feeling sorry for itself, pick itself up and put its best foot forward. Because again, if we are people who are competent and people who are of character and we are driven by the national interest rather than ourselves, we can help solve the monumental problems that Australia is facing and the huge challenges and opportunities that are coming forward. The Liberal Party has a bright future and I am an optimist on what we can offer the Australian people.
Glad to hear it. It's been a pleasure having you on Curtin's cast. It's been, used the word curious many times in the opening stanza of our episode, and I like that. And if we're going to have people on the other side of the aisle, I'd like to see more Keith Wolahans in Parliament. Curious types who are curious about the world and their electorate and willing to serve and put their ideas and livelihoods and time on the line. So thank you very much, Keith, for joining us on Curtin's cast. Kung Fu Kos Samaras, as always. Thank you very much. Curtinistas, that's it for this week's show. Check us out on Apple, Spotify and YouTube and refer a mate. We will see you next time. Ciao and arrivederci.